Well, my name's Calum Baird. I'm a musician and songwriter from Scotland. I've been a musician for 10 years. I'm also an activist on the left. I'm interested in politics. I'm interested in how we organise culture and how cultural production is made, where it's made, how people get access to it, and how we can have a political discussion about these matters that are often on the fringes of contemporary politics.
Let's start with the Edinburgh Fringe. It's August, after all. Is the Fringe, put it bluntly, is the Fringe the vibrant, exciting festival for folk that the promo suggests it is, or is it a deeply alienating experience for people in Edinburgh, do you think?
The first thing I would say is that, to sort of paraphrase Karl Marx, I mean, I've been thinking this a lot, the point isn't to interpret the Edinburgh Festival, the point is to change it. And I think a lot of people haven't really picked up on that. I think a lot of people on the left are quite reactionary towards the Edinburgh Festival because there is a big influx of corporate money. A lot of the sort of damage that's done to the city, and I mean damage in the literal sense, in terms of public spaces needing repairs afterwards, in terms of venues needing repairs afterwards, and things like that. Corporations come, they allow that to happen, and then they leave with the receipts. And so I think a lot of people on the left are opposed to that. I think they're obviously rightly opposed to the housing situation in Edinburgh, which has just been allowed to get worse and worse and worse. And there's very little legislation coming from the Scottish Government on it. There's bits and pieces coming from the council, and it seems to be frustrated at the moment, and it's a topic of discussion in the city. But I think the attitude that a lot of people on the left are maybe moving towards is, how can we scale back the festival, or do we even need it at all? I think when I started out as a musician, I started out shortly before the Edinburgh Festival. That wasn't planned. I wasn't thinking, I need to start writing some songs and do some open mic nights and get some gig experience because the Edinburgh Festival's coming. It was sort of like, I was working in retail at the time. I was a full-time student, and in the summer I was working in retail, and I had a guitar and I just started going out and playing some gigs. And they went all right, nobody booed or hissed at me, so I carried on, and then I started doing gigs at the Edinburgh Festival, and that month working at the Edinburgh Festival, I made more money doing those gigs than I was getting from working in the shop. Now there's a question there about minimum wage in shops, there's a question there about conditions in shops, of course, but for artists coming up to the festival, that you can make more in a month than you can make 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 put together. It's literally like harvest time for artists. So if you get rid of that, a lot of artists are going to be poor, are going to see their incomes impacted, they're going to see their opportunities impacted. It's not just about what gigs you get, it's people who are there that you can go and speak to.
Scottish Government last year, December 22, as they were sort of formulating the budget, we're going to cut 7 million out of Creative Scotland as a means of trimming the belt a bit. That cut in the end never came, but that kind of art is expendable attitude, do you think that's the general approach of the Scottish Government and Holyrood to culture?
Well, the Scottish Government in 2020 released a programme thing, policy paper is probably what they would call it, called A Culture Strategy for Scotland. And I'm not joking, the opening paragraph said, culture is extremely important for Scotland's cultural and social development. Right? Culture is extremely important for Scotland's cultural and social development. Really? Wow. I would never have guessed that. And I think that actually says more about the Scottish Government's attitude towards culture, or as much as their attitude towards cutting funding for it. I read recently, ties in with the Edinburgh Festival stuff, that there's a £5 million black hole around Edinburgh Festival funding for next year. These are very small sums of money in the grand scheme of things. I mean, to most people, £5 million, you could probably live off that for the rest of your life, but in governmental terms, those are actually really small pools of money. £7 million, £5 million, that's actually nothing in governmental terms. Most businesses, that's probably not even half of their balance sheet in Scotland. So these are really tiny pools of money, and the fact that they were that was going to be withdrawn and the whole thing was going to go down the pan. I think there was something like a third or maybe even 2/3 of the institutions that are funded by Creative Scotland were going to be wiped out. I think what that speaks to fundamentally, because you could argue all day about Scottish Government's attitude towards culture, and they would say, well, we've done this, and then I would say this, and then other people would say, I think what actually the fundamental problem is the sustainability of art and culture is not, despite all the discussion and conversation about who loves culture more, and that the issue is the sustainability is just not there, and it's never been built in. It's always been. Now, I'm not trying to use the sort of like quasi-Thatcherite argument of you give an institution money so far and that keeps them going, but then they have to find their own sustainability. You know, I'm not trying to make that argument. But I think the fact that the Scottish Government or Creative Scotland or these institutions have never encouraged the art organisations they fund to find their own sustainability, to help them develop a sustainable programme or organise art and culture in a sustainable way, is the problem. I mean, if you're going to have organisations like Underbelly, Tennent's, Heineken, vodka and other companies coming up and sponsoring the Edinburgh Festival, then my position would be to tax these companies quite heavily and use that money to fund the grassroots stuff. I don't think that's an especially radical position either. I think that's quite milquetoast. So I don't think that's asking too much. I think a big issue for me about art and culture funding is the way that local governments kind of sidestepped and sort of pushed to the side. So you have Creative Scotland, which is in some cases doing its best, in other cases almost like an arm's length organisation of the Scottish Government, and this local government's kind of pushed aside and almost an afterthought on how culture is organised. And I think we're seeing that with Glasgow Life and the way that they're introducing charges to basic leisure facilities and some of the stuff that's going on at the Museum of Modern Art, the cuts there, the job cuts, wage caps, and so on.
While Banksy's having his exhibition.
While Banksy's having his, of course, while Bank, one of Britain's greatest living sort of protest artists, if you like, is having his exhibition there. So I think there's a question of sustainability. I think there's a question of who actually is in control here. Is it the Scottish Government? Is it Creative Scotland? How can local government and local authorities be pulled into it? What they do at the moment is to set up arm's length organisations and claim they're third party or nothing to do with the council. That's clearly not the case and doesn't work. And then there's a question about where is capacity, and this is something that I'm really concerned about, is where is capacity actually located at the moment, despite cuts and assaults and closures, assaults on capacity and closures. It's still, if you want to go and see a play, you go to Glasgow, you go to Edinburgh, you go to a city, you maybe go to Dundee, maybe go to Aberdeen, or if you're living in and around those areas, you would go into the city centre to go and see a play. Some places you might even go into the city centre to see a film, just to go to the cinema. So the local capacity and outside city centres is just not there. It doesn't exist. If you're a touring band, you need to go to Edinburgh or Glasgow or a big city, and I think this is something that has been lost and eroded away since the Thatcherite period, the Thatcher period of neoliberalism, and this is something that's been lost more and more and more, to the extent where local art schools are gone, to local art networks are kind of eroded away, and there's never been an attempt to build those up and sustain those, and that's part of the problem as well, is you just have all these little institutions that are here and there, and the network is not robust, is not able to sustain itself properly, and not able to pull in new people and new ideas, and that's the real issue. Yeah, I mean, culture in like the broad sense of the word is how the ruling class diffuses its ideas, how it convinces people of its right to rule society. So the cultural industries are important in that sense, and it's really important to have a look at how they're managed and organised, because that tells you what the ruling class thinks about culture that particular in our particular period. But in terms of the actual economy, away from the big events, away from Glastonbury, away from the Edinburgh Festival, away from the big cinemas and the big theatres and the big production houses, the way that it's organised at a grassroots level is relatively similar to how it was in the feudal times, where it was quite precarious. You didn't have a guaranteed income, you had to sort of go about. I mean, the original gig economy is actually in the arts economy, because you never actually the arts economy is founded on precarious work. Artists don't have
stable
income. They have to sort of ally themselves with different people, find a patron and things like that, find people that will book them for shows and stuff like that and work with them and really gig their way to a livelihood. So, and I think this is maybe a bit of a hot take, but I think what a lot of people, particularly in the gig economy today, they've looked at that as that they've seen that art model, they've seen that model of economising in the arts, and they've tried to replicate that in a way that they try to get all workers to gig around looking for their income.
Yeah, of course.
Because they don't then have to pay taxes on those workers, they don't have to pay their national insurance, they can get them to list themselves as self-employed, and it all makes a lot of sense for organising. From their point of view, organising society and culture.
How important is artists, musicians showing solidarity with hospitality staff just now, do you think?
Yeah, I think we can see a lot of parallels in the way that artists work and the way that hospitality workers work at the moment. It's very gig based, it's very there's a lot of precarity, there's a lot of artists are often asked to work for less than what they are asked to work for less than what they should be getting paid, or they're asked to work for free. I think hospitality workers are in similar situations where they're overworked. They are paid far less than what they deserve, and their income has for a long time been subsidised through tips, or maybe even having a second job somewhere else. So I think artists need to recognise that parallel. I think artists need to ask the question when they're booking a venue or they're considering a venue for a show or a gig or an event. They need to have ask about the employment practices in this venue. I think we're coming to a period in our history now to once again sound like an academic, where these things are less and less separate from one another. We can start to see where there are
intersecting crises.
Exactly, intersecting crises. We can start to see where these things start to fold into one another. And the question about art and culture and access to art and culture isn't just about people from an elite background, working class people. Isn't just a class, gender or race issue. It's something as basic as, can I get a bus to my gig? No, I have to drive. Well, if I didn't drive, I can't go and do the gig, so therefore I can't. That's me losing an opportunity. And it's not just the musician, it's also the people who want to come to the show. As I said earlier, if you want to go to a show, you've got to travel into a city centre. And it's seeing the way that the crises in transport fold into the crises in access to art and culture, and vice versa. And seeing the way that all these different crises fold into one another is really important, and I think it's important for artists to see that, but I think it's also important for people who are not in art to sort of see that as well.
You've got a new single out?
I do.
Beauty in the Worst of Times?
Yep.
It's quite the title. It's a great title. What's it about?
Well, it's based on a poem by Bertolt Brecht, who is one of my favourite poets and artists from...
Art is a hammer.
Art is a hammer with which to shape society, correct. And he has a poem which I can't actually remember what it's called, that's embarrassing. As I said, it's one of my favourites, but he has a poem and it's will there be singing in the dark times? And he says, yes, I will be singing about the dark times. I like that, but I also wanted to take a dialectical approach to say, well, there will be singing about the dark times, Bertolt, but there can also be singing in the dark times that's not about the dark times. So I wanted to sort of draw on that, I guess. The song is really about how to not get try to sort of see the beauty and the solidarity and the commonality that's between us all, despite the ongoing circumstances.
Anything else you've got coming up that's worth talking about?
I'm going to Berlin in September, and I'm going to be playing a beautiful show in the Babylon Cinema in central Berlin. It's a concert to commemorate the life and work of Victor Jara, who is a great Chilean songwriter and one of my heroes. And so that's taking place in Berlin's got a huge Chilean diaspora living in there after the coup d'etat in the 70s.
50 years?
Yeah, exactly. So it's a 50-year commemoration of Victor Jara's murder, and the Chilean community and the left have organised this show. So it's going to be a great gig, and that's on the 16th. So if you're in Berlin, Come along.